You know, a third worldist friend had once told me that fascism is just colonialism turned inward. And, you know, that was probably the most resounding explanation for fascism I'd ever heard. And usually I don't agree with third worldists because they have a pretty pessimistic view about the class politics in the United States, you know, considering that they consider most American workers to be labor aristocratic at some point or another, okay? And therefore have no revolutionary capability. Not all, but a good amount of third worldists believe this, including Maoists, okay? And so when I heard that statement, that was one of the things I actually kind of agreed with a lot of third worldists, is that fascism is just colonialism turned inwards. The brutality that the Western European powers had dealt out to countries that they had formerly colonized, well, fascism is no different, enacting the same brutality except internally within the Western powers themselves, and for instance, the United States. And so I was watching a stream, a leftover stream, that was between Donald Trump and Bukele of El Salvador, where they were talking about the possibility of returning a Maryland man who was deported to El Salvador, okay? And the Supreme Court had ordered Trump to, you know, provide the means so that they can be returned. But of course, the little bureaucratic, like, hot potato game that Bukele and Trump did is that Bukele is not going to allow the person to leave El Salvador. And he is now thrown in this high security prison, which is effectively a concentration camp. Can we stop pretending that these are not concentration camps? None of these people have had due process, okay? You know, it's one thing to be tough on crime and all that sorts of stuff, to set up literal concentration camps, that's what they are. You know, I'm not gonna not call something that looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, okay? You can't just come at me and say, oh, you can't call it a duck. Well, if it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck, it's probably a duck, okay? So these concentration camps where they're throwing people in, okay? And so, ironically enough, Trump has been talking about for the last couple of months about how, you know, that the United States should be inspired by such a similar model that they have in El Salvador. And, you know, it brings no doubt in my mind that he's planning on declaring martial law here in the United States as well. Okay, what remains to be seen is whether or not he is going to deport American citizens to El Salvador, or they're going to set up a parallel system similar to CECOT in the United States, effectively concentration camps in the United States. And don't come on my chat acting like that's not a concentration camp. If you used to suspend, you know, due process and the Posse Comitatus Act, and you just throw people in camps, even jails, that's a concentration camp. Let's stop beating around the bush. Let's not play, like, pleasantries. Let's not bullshit anybody here. Nobody's falling for that shit. That's a concentration camp, okay? And so, you know, Donald Trump has said he's been heavily inspired by Bukele, which is effectively a dictator anyways, in El Salvador, you know, to do a similar thing to handle crime in the United States. So as I was watching that stream towards the end, okay, is that, you know, one reporter asked Donald Trump if he has any intention to deport, non-migrant workers or non-migrant criminals to El Salvador. And he said, yeah, well, you know, I'm not going to use it too terribly much, but now the Overton window's sliding further to the right, as it usually does. And he says, well, you know, we're only going to deport American citizens who are natively born here for the most heinous of crimes. Okay, because that's more tolerable. But, you know, again, he's trying to grease the wheel and eventually, you know, probably, you know, expand that window even further to include more people who are native borns, maybe even just political dissidents. But is that really any surprise? Okay, so, you know, he's talking about deporting American citizens and that have committed crimes to El Salvador. Okay, now here's kind of the thing. Okay, the Trump administration has already talked about how they've been heavily inspired by Bukele's regime, because I'm going to call it that. Let's not pretend that they aren't just the regime, because they have concentration camps and they're throwing people in, and you can get all pissy in the comment section with me, whatever, right? I've never been one to tell people what they want to hear. They've been inspired to. What remains to be seen is whether or not he's going to set up a parallel system to CECOT, similar in the United States, as El Salvador has done in, you know, Bukele has done in El Salvador, or whether or not he's just going to dump American criminals into El Salvador. Okay? And, you know, I'm on the same camp. If you're the kind of person to come in the chat and be like, you know, I like people who are tough on crime. I'm going to be real with you. I think most people don't like crime in their neighborhoods. That includes myself. That includes, you know, the people I hang around with. We generally don't like crime, is because it causes a lot of civil disturbances. It's not a healthy civilization, and we're not against being tough on crime. But you know, suspending due process and throwing people in jail and then possibly going after political dissidents, that ain't it, Chief. You know, being tough on crime is one thing. Deporting migrant workers or deporting people who are illegally here in the country in the first place, that's one thing. Okay, but to deport American citizens, so many people have already been put on edge on that sort of stuff, and I don't blame them. I would be on edge on that sort of stuff too, if that was basically consistently dangling over my head. Oh, I'm a political dissident, and you're gonna basically deport me, a native-born American citizen, out of my own country. Okay? The way that I see it is that, and that's kind of an interesting thing, because I titled this video because I wanted to get into an interesting topic that a lot of people aren't seeing exactly here, and I kind of want to bring light to it. This is just kind of my own 2 cents, and you could say I'm scaremongering or whatever, right? It wasn't that long ago that Donald Trump talked about relocation camps for homeless people, and he talked about criminalizing it, okay? Let's be honest here, okay? This is something that's been in the works, okay? Project 2025 didn't come out of nowhere, okay? None of this stuff came out of nowhere, okay? And so you can say maybe I'm being a conspiracy theorist, but it seems oddly coincidental that he would talk about putting homeless people in camps, while at the same time talking about doing something similar to Bukele here in the United States, as opposed to El Salvador, just outright deporting American citizens, okay? And so it seems to me that they're just trying to set up the infrastructure to criminalize homeless people by either deporting them or putting them in concentration camps. I mean, they've already talked about relocating them to camps, and I don't believe this rehabilitation stuff. We're talking about people who cheered on Daniel Penny killing a homeless person, but they cried like little fucking bitches when Luigi Mangione shot a CEO, okay? These people are hypocrites. They're class elitists. They hate the working class. They hate poor people, okay? And so, they're just trying to let up the groundwork so they can then terrorize the working class of this country, okay? And it's ironic. And this is why I say, when they say this is going to be like Nazi Germany 2.0, this is what I meant earlier when I said the ruling class of the United States is prodding the bear. It's very hard to get the Anglosphere to stand up to their ruling class, okay? It took the Black Plague to cause the 1381 revolutions in the Anglosphere, okay? So it takes a lot, but not only they're criminalizing homelessness in an era when housing is wildly unaffordable. And so the way that I'm saying, because I've noticed it, and I don't know if it's because you guys are sharing my video, and I'm very much thankful for you guys doing that, but Gen Z is uniformly pissed off about being cut out of a decent standard of living, okay? They can't afford houses. They're forced to rent apartments instead. It's because they don't have the incomes necessary to buy a house in the first place, to settle down and have their traditional families. In fact, the people who do own properties, who are attending these city council meetings to prevent new construction of homes because they're trying to preserve their property values, see people who rent as like lower class criminals that should be kind of gatekept out of society. I mean, if you attended any city council meeting and encountered NIMBYs, they very much act like this, is that, low-cost housing is going to increase crime within the area, okay? So, like, if you're part of Gen Z, you should be kind of worried about this sort of stuff. I know you might be, in agreement and you want to be tough on crime, but who doesn't, okay? Honestly, even people who are left-wing don't like crime in their area, and there's nothing wrong with that. Wanting to have a stable and a decent civilization where you can settle down and have a family, there's nothing wrong with that, okay? But I want you to read between the class lines and recognize that, okay, since you're a part of the younger generation, you're probably never going to own a home, okay? I'm sorry, but you're a part of the class that they're calling criminal, okay? Because they don't like your existence, okay? They've rigged the entire system where they make it difficult because of the tributary class to actually settle down and have a family and do all these sorts of things, and then they gaslight you because of your situation that you're, criminal because of your class conditions, okay? They're talking about relocating homeless people to concentration camps, in a time where housing affordability is like just at an all-time low. Okay, but this is why I say it's like, if Donald Trump and his regime want to do a Nazi Germany 2.0, like, I don't know what else to say, but the thing is, it's not going to go down the same way it's gone down in history, okay? You don't have a well-enfranchised labor aristocracy that it's in their interest to preserve the regime, okay? That's not how this works. You've alienated an entire generation who unironically believe in your social values. They care about your conservative values, but you literally stripped them of the means of living the idealized vision in society that you want them to live, okay? And so, I know I'm saying a lot of bold things here right now, okay? But, everyone, if you're watching this video, you need to read between the class lines on what they're trying to do here, okay? These people literally cheer on the death of the homeless, okay? And you're telling me that, they're going to build rehabilitation camps for homeless people? Like, this was 3 months ago Trump was saying this. Like, read in between the lines of what they're trying to do, okay? Because it's not going to be pretty. Now, I said earlier that I expected Donald Trump to go fully through with Project 2025. There's been mass protests across the country over this sort of stuff. That doesn't surprise me either, okay? If Trump continues to do this stuff, it's going to get a lot uglier before it gets better. And here's kind of the thing, okay? If they go through martial law, the one key takeaway I want you to take away from this video, okay, is that, if they go through with this and they try to go after political enemies and they go after American citizens who are just trying to mind their own business that have different opinions, okay? Now, I know I made an entire video criticizing action-cellism. I'm not criticizing action. But the thing that you need to be doing right now, I'm not saying do action right now and go organize. Well, actually, you're going to need to organize. Let's be real here, okay? Is you need to start recognizing that you're going to need to start building strong communities and getting to know people and building social networks so you don't get disappeared, okay? Because if they go the way I think they're going to be going, okay? You know, the only thing that's really going to keep us safe, you as an individual, myself as an individual, okay, is to quite literally build strong, tight-knit communities where you can watch each other's backs. Just because then you won't get disappeared. It's much harder to make somebody disappear who's well-connected and has a ton of friends. I'm just saying that, you know, noticing that from experience, okay? So, you know, that's the one key takeaway. If Trump is going to go the way I think he's going to go, and I think a lot of people are in agreement with that, because I've been seeing YouTube videos all over the feed, and it's not just fear-mongering. Now is the time to organize, get to know friends, and build social circles that are strong, is because the person who's all alone is going to get disappeared the easiest, okay? Let's just be real here, okay? They're the weak link. They're an easy target, but strong communities keep these people out, okay? And so that's what I want you to take away from this video. I'm going to go ahead and cut it off here, is because I just want to get my thoughts off on what I think, like, you know, Trump is going to do, okay? It's an incredibly frightening time. I know you guys are all terrified about this sorts of stuff, okay? And you're also, to combine with the fact that you're terrified of this sort of stuff, you have another section of the aisle gaslighting you about how bad it's going to be, okay? I said on November 6th, I have a tweet on my Twitter page, is that I said he is going to go through with this because he has the popular will, and he is going to basically try and force all these values, his goals on everybody in a time where there's an economic crisis, okay? And unfortunately, I'm kind of surprised by the outreach that my previous videos were getting when I talked about Gen Z and class issues. I'm kind of surprised, but I'm also not surprised. It's because I've known about this. I've talked about the cost of living crisis on my channel for 2 years, okay? I didn't expect it to just all of a sudden show up now, but it happened, started, like, the numbers on my channel started going up, like, right around the Luigi Mangione instance, okay? Because class politics is coming back to the center stage, okay? And so, you know, I hate to say it, but the thing is that he's doing all these things in the middle of an economic crisis, and if he doesn't fix the economic crisis, you know, I hate to tell you what's going to happen next. You and I, you know, if you're semi-versed on what I've said on this channel, I think you and I both know what's going to happen next, you know. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it off there. Drop a like, share these ideas, and also stay close to your friends and families. I don't want anybody getting disappeared and all that sorts of stuff. If he goes the right route I think he is going to go down. So, you know, stay safe, everybody, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.